Hi everyone, welcome to Dennis Deep Cuts, the 72nd installment of this fine YouTube series. Today, we're going to talk about UK punk and hardcore. Let's see what happens. Welcome back to the channel, everyone. I am sorry that it's taken me ages to post here, but I've been busy. First, I went on tour with Refused for a couple weeks, and that was fantastic. So thank you to everyone that came out to those shows, and some of the best shows I played in my entire life. But during the tour, I had some issues with my medication, which meant that I had no energy to do anything but actually play the shows. Like hardly any record shopping. I didn't really do anything. Me and David did What's in My Bag at Amoeba, which was kind of awesome. But it was like one of the few things I did that wasn't me playing a show. So no energy to do any episodes. And then I've been home for a couple of weeks. I went on and played a couple of shows with Venice Casino. And then I just been trying to balance my medication so I feel good again. And after the heart attack, I told myself I'm not going to push it. I'm not going to force the issue if I don't feel that I have energy or that I have inspiration. But now I do have both. I have energy, I have inspiration, and it's time to do a new episode. Last time I talked about hidden American hardcore gems. I'm going to do a similar thing today, but more UK hidden hardcore gems or punk gems. I'm not going to talk about like, Sex Pistols or the Buzzcocks or the Damned or stuff like that, but more, some cool choices that I've found in my collection. And I mean, if you're a record collector, you will know most of these, I assume, but there's some cool stuff in here that you can check out. When I got into punk and hardcore and when I reach for records in my record collection, I usually reach for the American hardcore because that's kind of what got me into this path. Interesting enough, one of the first records, punk records that I had in my collection was this copy of Exploited's Troops of Tomorrow. I have no idea how it made its way into my collection. I really liked it. I was really intrigued by it, but it didn't push me over to become a punk full time. And it wasn't until I discovered more like crossover and hardcore stuff that I really got into it. So for the first couple of years, whenever I heard British punk, I always thought it was too slow and not aggressive enough because, you're into Minor Threat and Black Flag and stuff like that. But I've grown to love a lot of UK punk and hardcore. So today I'm going to deep dive a little bit into that world, and I'm going to give you some cool picks, and hopefully you'll find some new cool music. I mean, it's all old music. That should be a given. It's like late 70s to mid 80s, that kind of era of UK punk, but maybe it's new for you. All right, let's do it. So the first pick is, I'm gonna dive straight into like the whole UK 82 sound. And if you don't know what that means, it is kind of when punk became a uniform and it became mohawks and spiked hair and leather jackets, and it became kind of a sound in the UK. They call it UK 82, and it was very much because of the Exploited. But there's a bunch of bands like GBH and bands like that also carry that sound. And one of those bands that did carry that sound was English Dogs. This is their first EP, Mad Punks and English Dogs, which I assume is a wink to Joe Cocker. English Dogs started in 1981. This EP is from 1983, and it is UK 82 punk. It's uncompromising, kind of fast, and just kind of basic, but like in the best possible way. Their song Psycho Killer is not Talking Heads. It's something completely different. English Dogs put out one more full length when they sounded like this, the Return or the Revenge of the Porgy People. And then they ventured off into more of a metal sound with like the crossover, but metal punk, I would say. There's a whole slew of bands like Exploited and GBH and Discharge that went metal in the mid to late 80s to varied results. I gotta say that Exploited Jesus Is Dead EP is probably their finest hour of music, but I love the Massacre as well. But the English Dogs crossover records have really stood the test of time. I really like them. They were thrashy punk records. So if you want to check out some really nice UK 82 punk, check out the early stuff with English Dogs. And if you want to check out some more thrash metal punk rock, then check out the later stuff with English Dogs. It's all good. It's interestingly how in different scenes and different worlds, a certain band can have a huge impact and huge influence. Like you travel the world and you go to cities, and in that city, that band made it big because someone had a tape or someone had the record. And one of those bands that I didn't know about was the British band Empire. I went to the States a couple of years ago to hang out with Fake Names for the first time. And we were sitting in Michael's basement, and they asked me about like what kind of punk they, wanted to get to know me, and they asked me what kind of punk I was into. And they asked me, do you love the Ruts? And I said, yeah, the Ruts are fine. And then they got really upset, and I had to listen to the Ruts for like an hour. And then the other band that they told me about was Empire. Empire is a band that got started by two of the guys from Generation X. Generation X was, of course, Billy Idol's first band. When they broke up, or when Billy Idol went solo, the guitar player and drummer started Empire. And this record made it into DC in the early 80s. This is released in 1981. Empire put out this record in 1 7-inch. And it made it into DC, and it made the rounds, and bands like Rites of Spring, Grey Matter, you can even hear like some influences in Fugazi from Empire. And it's wild because Empire, outside of DC, no one really cared. Like, they put out this record, the label folded, the band broke up, no one really talked about them apart from that DC connection. And years later, this record has been reissued because of all the DC people that talked about it. This is more like kind of mellow post-punk, and I realize and I understand why the DC people loved it, because the guitar work and the guitar playing is pretty amazing, and you can hear a lot of the guitar playing in a lot of DC bands. So if you want to check out a UK punk band that really inspired the Revolution Summer and really inspired like the whole DC sound, Empire, fantastic. One band that I did talk a little bit about before on this show is, of course, the brilliant Flux of Pink Indians. Flux of Pink Indians, I think, one of the more interesting bands from this UK punk scene of the 80s. They're a band between 82 and 86. They put out 3 records, and they're all distinctively different, and they're all excellent. This first record from 1982 is like, I mean, it's kind of crass anarcho-punk, fast, sharp, distinct, really cool, really good, bordering on hardcore. And then 2 years later, they put out a record called These Fucking Pricks Treats Us Like Cunts, which is like super political, but it was also noisy and experimental. It doesn't really, I mean, it has traces of the first record, but it's just like a really cool and very avant-gardist kind of record. And then in 1986, they put out their final record, Uncarved Block, which I talked about before on the show, and that's like a experimental dub record, and I absolutely adore that record. I think all 3 records are great, but since we're talking about punk and hardcore, their first record is fantastic. If you're into that crass sort of peace punk hardcore stuff, then you can't go wrong. Flux of Pink Indians then went on to start a record label called One Little Indian that was widely successful in the late 80s and in the 90s. So it's quite interesting. But yeah, one of the more fascinating bands of the 80s punk world from the UK. So many moons ago, I used to do power pop band. I mean, we also called it record collector punk, called the Lost Patrol Band. And one of the bands that I was obsessed with at that time was Belfast's own Starjets. Starjets started in Belfast in 1976, and they put out a bunch of great 7-inches, and they put out this one single record in 1979. And if you're into well-crafted, super catchy, poppy punk, power pop music in the vein of, I would say, like Undertones or Buzzcocks. Then Starjets is definitely your record. It's a fantastic record from start to finish. Every other song is a hit, and I just love them. Fortunately, they're one of those bands that, you know, they put out a record at some 7 inches and they faded into obscurity, which is a shame. They did tour with Stiff Little Fingers, and they also did tour with the Bay City Rollers. So they were called like the Bay City Rollers of punk because they're pop sensibilities. But if that's your jam, then Starjets is just, it's a fantastic record, trust me. One thing that I find fascinating with UK punk and hardcore is that most of the time it has a very distinct UK sound, and you can sort of hear if a band is from the UK or if they're from the States or even mainland Europe. There are distinctions and differences that they're quite clear. However, in the mid to late 80s, there was a slew of bands from the UK that was really inspired by American hardcore, and even though they were inspired by American hardcore, it was a very English, British sort of hardcore take on it. And I'm talking about like Heresy or Ripcord. And then you had a band that I discovered in the late 80s because I saw the record in the local record store, and there were skateboards, and one guy had like a skateboarding hat on, and I was like, who are these guys? And I'm of course talking about the Stupids. The Stupids started in Ipswich in 1984 and broke up in 1989. They put out 4 full-length records in 4 years, and toured the States, and they put out a split with the Hard-Ons, and it's very much like skate punk mixed with hardcore, even some blast beats, and it's more whimsical and funny than a lot of the UK hardcore counterparts, because they do sing about skateboarding and stuff like that. And it's I always loved the Stupids. I thought they were great. And if you're into that, like more American style hardcore, and you're into some fast infest, at times infest inspired skate punk, then the Stupids are just fantastic. And I think all 4 records that they put out in the 80s are well worth seeking out. They're all great. And yeah, I love the Stupids. Some bands and some records are really hard to talk about because it's kind of hard to describe the way they sound and the way they make you feel. I'm going to bust out a record that I think is a 10 out of 10 record. It's one of my favorite UK punk and hardcore. I mean, it's one of my favorite punk and hardcore records of all time. I am, of course, talking about Rudimentary Peni's debut album, Death Church, from 1983. Rudimentary Peni started in 1980, and they put out a record called Cacophony in 1988, and they still put out records and EPs and are sort of semi-active. Musically, it's hard to explain. A lot of the songs are short, sharp, really sort of aggressive, but some of it's more, some is like peace punk and hardcore, and some of it more like post-punky stuff. But it's one of those bands, like you sort of have to listen to it to sort of understand it. And the artwork by Nick Blinko is fantastic. They're just one of those bands that, like, they're very intriguing. I don't know a ton about them, but whenever I put this record on or any of this stuff, I'm wildly fascinated by the way they sound and the way they perform and the way they play. So yeah, Rudimentary Peni, fucking fantastic band. So this next one's a bit different. It's a record that never came out, or it didn't come out when it was supposed to come out. It came out way later. Ireland had a really cool punk scene in the early 80s. You, of course, your Stiff Little Fingers, your Undertones. We already talked about the Starjets. And there was a really cool record label called Good Vibrations that pretty much everything they put out in the early days are just phenomenal punk rock. Another band from Belfast was, of course, Protex. They're a band from 1979 to 1981, I think. And they put out a couple of cool 7-inches. And they got signed to Polydor Records. And then they recorded their first record. It was supposed to come out 1980, called Strange Obsessions. And for reasons that I cannot understand, the record never got released until like 2010. Either the band or the label decided that wasn't good enough, which blows my mind, because this is a phenomenal, once again, one of those super well constructed power pop punk records. Compared to Starjets, it's a bit more punky and has a little bit more raw edge to it, but the songwriting is flawless. The choruses are super catchy, and it's just an amazing record. And it blows my mind that it didn't come out in the 1980 when it was supposed to come out, because they might have been a huge band. Protex, phenomenal. All their 7-inches are great. The Strange Obsession record that never came out is just amazing. Interestingly enough, one of my favorite bands is, of course, The Sound from the UK. I did a full episode on Adrian Borland. There's also a band from the UK called The Sounds. They started in Reading in 1977 and they broke up in 1982. Very much a part of like the whole crass peace punk scene. And this is the one and only LP, The Curse of the Sounds. They put out a couple of cool 7-inches as well. And this is just another 10 out of 10 record. Compared to a lot of the crass type of bands, like, I mean, even like Rudimental Peni or Flux Pinkinians that I talked about, this is way more post-punk. It's way more, what if Gang of Four had been anarchists? Like real anarchists. That's kind of what it sounds like. It has a cleaner sound, and it's just a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful record. There's a compilation of this record with all their 7-inches from the 80s that's well worth seeking out, because their first 7-inch, War Subvert, has some of the best krautrock-esque punk rock that I ever heard. And the sounds are just phenomenal. They did a reunion in the early 2000s, and I still think they might be out playing shows and stuff like that. But if you're into that like weird angular post-punk sort of Gang of Four-esque stuff, but a bit raw, then this Sounds record is just right up your alley. I love it so much. All right, let's talk about a band from Dublin, the Defects. They're a band between 1979 and 1985. Defective Breakdown, the one and only full-length record. I think that this is great. They put out a couple of 7-inches, but this is great. This is really UK punk. Strong choruses, guitar-driven, no frills, nothing like fancy about it. It's just like punk rock. Like it kind of sounds the way they look. It may be slight touch poppier than they look, but this is just phenomenal. It's like reminds me of a little bit of a poppier GBH maybe. But yeah, they're great. Really cool record. Defective Breakdown. I love the fact that I bought this. I bought this years ago. And it has a sticker on it because I think it used to belong to a library, and it says heavy metal on the front, which is just phenomenal. But yeah, the Defects, Dublin, great. The final record of the day, and also the record that inspired me to do this episode. I've been on such a Coxbar trip the last couple of weeks. It's all I've been listening to, and I finally got a hold of their first album. Coxbar started already in like 1972 or something like that. They've been around forever. They were like more of a pub rock band, and then in 1978 they got signed to Decca Records, and they recorded their first full-length record, and it never got released apart from Spain. This is actually a reissue of it because it was only released in Spain on Decca. And then the band kind of broke up, and a couple of years later when punk was in full swing, They got back together and they released in 1983. They released a brilliant Shock Troops records, which I think, honestly, might be a little bit better than the first record. But I'll talk about why I'm talking about the first record first. But Shock Troops is almost a perfect pop record. Every chorus is a hit. All the vocal melodies are just amazing. The lyrics are kind of funny, like working class anthems. And I think a lot of times when punk bands have poppy melodies, it kind of like, it's a melodic language that after a couple of songs you understand it. But on Shock Troops, it's like every song has a catchy melody that doesn't sound like the song before. So I am in effect telling you to check out the Shock Troops record because it's probably one of the best UK punk records of all time. I kid you not. They put out one more record, Running Riot, in 1984. Broke up, and in the mid 90s they got back together, and now they're kind of just a band that chugs along. And I think they put out a record last year. Cox Bar has been sort of lumped into like the oi sort of street punk thing because of the working class anthems, but I would say they're more like as I said, the first couple of records are perfect pop songs. The reason why I picked the first Cox Bar records is because there's something truly fascinating. I mean, it has the punk rock logo on it, and it's kind of punky, but at the same time, it sounds like Slade on steroids. It has that like glammy edge to it, like some pub rock, some glam rock, and some punk rock, and they don't really look punk. There's some mullets involved in the photos, and I love it. I'm so fascinated by this record, and it is weird that Decca didn't believe in it enough to actually release it in the UK. I'm really glad this reissue came out because the Spanish version is quite pricey, but I mean, I guess it's gonna find its way into my home one of these days. But yeah, I've been on such a Cox Bar trip the last couple of weeks, and that made me excited to revisit UK punk and hardcore. And there you have it, 10 UK punk, post-punk, hardcore records that you can check out. I recommend all these. They're all fucking great, and they're all very different. What's your favorite hidden gem of UK punk and hardcore? What did I miss, and what haven't you heard before? And so on and so forth. Thank you for checking out another episode. I hope that I won't be absent for that long. I do have a really good idea for the next episode. It might happen soon. Until next time, stay wild, my friends. Bye-bye.